Today, I would like to start by asking you a question. What are the true crime cases that keep you up at night? That you find fascinating for one reason or another? That you know could be solved if just the right person heard the story? Well, today on The Secret Sits, we are elated to give you our first ever listener-requested episode. This is a fascinating case that made national headlines for all the wrong reasons. Today, we are discussing the murder of Jennifer Levin by the Preppy Killer. Jennifer Levin was born on May 21, 1968, in Merrick, New York, the second daughter of Stephen and Ellen Levin. Her parents divorced when she was still young, and Levin used her social life as a way to escape her turbulent home life, eventually joining the active life of single women in Manhattan. Levin was close to her mother, but some say she regarded her more as a friend than a parent. She lived in the shadow of her older sister Danielle, who later gave birth to a child she named Samantha Jennifer after her sister. Levin moved into a Soho loft with her father, a real estate developer, and her stepmother Arlene, but friends said that she resented her stepmother and often quarreled with her father. She used to call me in tears and sleep over at my house because of the fights with her dad, one friend told a reporter. They were just about the usual things: coming home late, cleaning her room, getting her priorities straight, and after a day, everything would be lovey-dovey again. But she never really felt comfortable living there. She hated being left alone in the loft and felt at times she was intruding on her father's life. She used to leave little toys around for her parents with notes saying she was sorry and would try to be better. Levin went to Baldwin School, a small, expensive private high school on West 74th Street in Manhattan. The principal said Levin, who graduated in June 1986, was a good, average student. She described herself as street smart, not book smart, and was proud of the way she dealt with people. Her friends said the 5'7", 135-pound brunette, who was voted the girl with the best figure by her high school class, was assertive and flirtatious. During her senior year at Baldwin, the teenager began hanging out at Dorian's Red Hand restaurant, a popular preppy bar where she met Robert Chambers in the summer of 1986. Robert Emmett Chambers Jr. was born on September 25, 1966. He was the only child born to Phyllis Chambers and Robert Chambers Sr. Phyllis was an immigrant who was born in Ireland. Robert Sr. worked for MCA Records and later in video cassette distribution. The family lived in Manhattan and before that in Queens in a working-class area. Although the family was not wealthy, his mother in particular was determined that her son would be part of the New York elite circles. Chambers' mother was a trained nurse who had moved from Ireland to New York in the late 1950s in search of a better life. She found a job working at a hospital and was even a nurse for JFK Jr. at one point. In contrast to Phyllis's immigrant story, Robert Chambers Sr. had a more privileged upbringing. He was from a well-to-do Irish-English family. He had attended Mitchell College in Connecticut and the American University in Washington, D.C. His family also had money and had multiple homes. Phyllis and Robert Sr. married in 1965. A year later, they had Robert Jr. Although Robert Sr. struggled himself with substance abuse for a time, the parents managed to enroll Robert Jr. in prep schools. He was even an altar boy. His substance abuse and corresponding problems started in his teens. In fact, Robert Jr. started his cocaine habit as young as 14. Chambers was accepted by Boston University where he completed one semester but was asked to leave because of difficulties, one involving a stolen credit card. He subsequently committed other petty thefts and burglaries in connection with his drug and alcohol abuse, mostly while attending parties at his rich friends' houses, but no one ever turned him in. Unable to hold a job, he was issued a summons for disorderly conduct one night after leaving Dorian's Red Hand, a bar located at 300 East 84th Street in Manhattan. Chambers destroyed the summons as the police were leaving the scene, yelling at them, "You fucking cowards." Jennifer Levin and Robert Chambers knew each other through social circles in Manhattan. They had even casually dated 2 or 3 times before. On August 25, 1986, a Monday evening, 18-year-old Jennifer Levin was out with some friends at Dorian's Red Hand bar. When she wasn't studying, Jennifer liked to party, and that's exactly what she decided to do on this night. Jennifer had been partying in the Hamptons with friends the week prior and had returned to Manhattan that evening. She met up with 2 friends for drinks and went on to Dorian's bar around midnight. The scene at Dorian's that night was the typical scene. The bar, which was quite popular with the young social elite of Manhattan, was full and everyone was having their typical fun night out. It was in the dead heat of summer and the party lasted long into the night. Nothing seemed unusual about the evening until the next morning when some of Jennifer's friends found out that she had never made it home. On August 26th, just past 6 a.m., a cyclist named Pat Riley was in Central Park when she noticed something strange on a grassy knoll area of the park just behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or the Met as most people would know it. What she sees looks like a young woman who is laying under a tree. She can immediately tell that something is not quite right, just by the way the woman's body is positioned. She had one leg up, one arm up, and as she got closer, she could tell the woman is most likely deceased. Pat Riley immediately calls for the police, and by 7 a.m., the area is swarming with law enforcement. They cordon off the area all around the body while they attempt to identify the victim. They can see red marks around her neck and bruises all around her body. One of her eyes was swollen shut. Her blouse and bra are pushed up over her breasts, and her short pink skirt was pulled up to her waist, and she did not have on any underwear, which would later be found over 100 feet from her body. Police decided to close off all exits to the island of Manhattan. Police identified the victim as Jennifer Levin. And remember that this is Central Park in the 1980s. It's a scary place. The park is typically overrun with degenerates, drug dealers, sex workers, and vagabonds, especially at night. And when something happens to a white person in the park, it becomes a big deal, especially when it's murder. After identifying Jennifer from her learner's permit and birth certificate, which are both found in her wallet, police began to speak with Jennifer's friends who were out with her at the bar the previous evening. They told police that Jennifer had left the bar around 4:30 a.m. with 19-year-old Robert Chambers, and everything had seemed fine. Chambers was well known around the area, and police went to his house to speak with him. He came out of the bedroom, and the minute the 2 homicide detectives saw him, they saw deep, fresh, bloody scratches on both sides of his face, says Linda Farstein, who was the prosecutor for this case. And in their minds, without saying anything, their immediate thought was this guy has to explain those scratches. His explanation that his cat scratched him fell apart under questioning, and he admitted killing Jennifer. The story he told police, which seemed to blame Jennifer, was a shocking and graphic story about having rough sex in the park. He claimed Jennifer was hurting him, and the blow he gave her to make her stop hit her in the neck and killed her. Well, I can tell you that everything he said in that statement about how she died is absolutely untrue, says Farstein. citing evidence of a violent struggle. The prosecutor said they argued bitterly about something that night, and Chambers squeezed Levin's neck very hard for a long time. Robert admitted to being at Dorian's bar the night of August 25th, but he was not in the best of moods on this night. You see, Robert was supposed to meet his girlfriend at a different bar earlier that evening, but he didn't go because he was depressed, having just learned that one of his friends had committed suicide. While at Dorian's bar, his girlfriend showed up and confronted him, throwing a bag of condoms in his face, shouting, "Use these with someone else because you're not going to get a chance to use them with me." As his girlfriend left, Robert started talking to Jennifer. At around 5 a.m., a doctor who lived on the Upper East Side was jogging through the park. He noticed that he had jogged past the same couple twice. The first time he had passed them, it looked like they were a normal couple out together and everything seemed fine. The second time around, approximately 20 minutes later, when he was jogging past, he heard a muffled sound like someone crying out for help. The jogger asked if everything was all right, to which the male answered, "Yes, everything is okay," and the jogger kept going. Robert had told police that Jennifer had caused the scratches to his face and that he had killed her, but it had been an accident. According to Robert's version of events, Jennifer wanted to have rough sex. He said that she tied his hands behind his back using her own underwear, because according to Robert, Jennifer thought he looked cuter if he was tied up. He then says that Jennifer sits on his chest facing away from him, reaches into his pants and sexually assaults him, all the while scratching his chest. He then claimed that he was not into the sexual acts and that he was scared and couldn't get away because his hands were tied. Now, in the 80s, there's an overwhelming opinion that men could not be sexually assaulted by women, which is something we recognize today as false. Anyone can be sexually assaulted. But it wasn't just this that made them skeptical of Robert's story. His hands were tied so he couldn't get away, only using a small pair of female panties. Strike one. He claimed Jennifer was sitting on top of him, but he easily outweighed her and probably could have just knocked her off if he had tried. Strike two. Robert continues with his story, and he claims that eventually he is able to get one hand free, and he is then able to shove Jennifer off of him. He said that after he pushed her off, she just doesn't move. At first, he thought she was just joking around, but then she didn't move at all. But police catch a strange way Robert phrases this claim, because when he is telling the story, he says he pushed the body off of him. This immediately perks up the detective's ears, because people don't typically talk about a person as a body when they know the person is still alive. Police asked what happened next. Robert said he just stayed in Central Park. He said that he just sat on a wall not far from Levin's corpse. When law enforcement and emergency services arrived at the park, Chambers was still in the area, but he didn't tell any of the officers that he knew Levin. Consequently, police told Chambers, along with members of the public who were at the scene, to leave. The police have enough to arrest Robert and charge him with murder. The medical examiner who performed Jennifer's autopsy said that she died from pressure applied to her throat for at least 20 to 40 seconds. There were pinpoint hemorrhages in the soft tissue around Jennifer's eyes, which showed evidence of compression around her neck, and her official cause of death was ruled asphyxia by strangulation. Robert was charged with second-degree murder, and due to the participants in the case being rich, young adults from affluent families, the media coverage was endless. The media and the public were fascinated by the story of this murder, and they were especially fascinated by Robert Chambers. Robert was a tall and handsome man. He had the look and the air of a Kennedy, and the media soon dubbed him the Preppy Killer. And Robert started receiving hundreds of love letters from female admirers. Robert was even on the cover of People magazine while being charged with murder. Archbishop Theodore Edgar McCarrick of Newark, New Jersey, later Archbishop of Washington, wrote a letter of support for Chambers' bail application. He had known Chambers and his mother because she had been employed as a nurse by Cardinal Terence Cook. McCarrick was close to the Chambers family and had served as Robert's godfather at his baptism. Chambers had secured bail through his family and the owner of the bar, Jack Dorian, who put up his townhouse as collateral for a bail bond. After being released on bail, a home video of Robert leaked, showing him surrounded by 4 women in lingerie. They are all laughing, and Robert mimics choking himself while making gagging noises. He then holds up a Barbie doll and twists its head off, and he says,
"My name is..." Oops. I think I killed it.
Robert's mother, Phyllis, gets him one of the most famous criminal lawyers in New York at the time, Jack Littman. Jack sees the media circus around Robert and pounces on it. He starts a media campaign to make Jennifer out to be a promiscuous, sexual deviant, all the while making Robert out to be the victim in this whole situation. Jack plays up the side of Robert that the public will eat up. He was an altar boy. He is the son of immigrants who are just working hard to pay for him to go to the best schools. He is part of sports teams, and ultimately, look how handsome he is. Because good looks are a sound legal strategy, apparently. Jack claims the girls are always throwing themselves at him, but Robert was a good boy and Jennifer was a bad girl. And Jack even claims that if Jennifer hadn't wanted to engage in rough sex, this would have never happened. And the phrase rough sex becomes a big part of this case. It is splashed across print news. It is said over and over on TV news. It's used to paint Jennifer as the aggressor instead of the victim. Because of the victim blaming during this case, especially because that is also the way it's portrayed in the media as well, feminist groups and activists started protesting, and the public eventually becomes split. You either believe that Jennifer was the victim, or you believe she was the aggressor and had it coming. New York Daily News headlines read, "How Jennifer Courted Death," and "Sex Play Got Rough." Levin's reputation was attacked, while Chambers was portrayed as Kennedy-esque, preppy altar boy with a promising future. Chambers was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. His defense lawyer Littman, who had previously used the temporary insanity defense on behalf of Richard Herron for the murder of Yale University student Bonnie Garland, claimed Levin was promiscuous, saying she had a sex diary and her sexual history was admissible as evidence. The diary included entries which included details of kinky and aggressive sexual activity by Jennifer with many different lovers. After the jury failed to reach a verdict after 9 days of deliberation, the prosecution allowed Chambers to plead guilty to a manslaughter charge, and he received a sentence of 15 years. At the end of his trial, Chambers gave his personal statement. You listen, and you decide if you think he's being sincere.
You may proceed. Today we came to see the end of a trial with no answers, a trial with no winners. The Levin family have gone through hell because of my actions, and I am sorry. For 2 years I have not been able to say I'm sorry. I've not been able to say anything, but now I wish to have my feelings known. Whoever said that time heals all wounds is definitely wrong, because how can these wounds heal They linger forever, and the families will suffer. Jennifer's looking down on this now at the circus arena, looking and wondering why it all happened, and I don't know. I never wished any of this to happen. I never wanted any of this to happen. But her name will live on, not through memories, but by her family and her feelings. And I wish to apologize to the family and to her friends for all the trouble that they've gone through. I've never wanted any of this to happen to anybody. To my family and friends, I wish to express my love and my gratitude for all they've done. I've only wanted to love them, but I never seemed to grasp what it meant. For those friends that kept the vigil, I thank them on behalf of their families, and I'm sure I can understand the feelings they had. For those that kept the faith, they're always in my prayers. And to Jennifer, nothing I can do or say will ever bring her back, but I am sorry. I just wish to thank the jury and the court officers for helping so much, for giving me a fair trial. They met me each day with a smile and gave me encouraging words each night. I'd like to thank my lawyers for all the splendid work they've done. They kept my family together through rough times, and I'll never be able to repay them. And to your honor, I want to thank you for the fairest trial that you can give under the circumstances. You didn't give in to the public pressure. You did what you thought was right. And I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
In 1988, Levin's parents filed a wrongful death suit against Chambers, seeking $25 million in damages. Chambers pleaded no contest to the charges, so he was ordered to pay any lump sum payments to the Levins, as well as 10% of his wages until the amount was paid in full. The family has said all the money it gets from Chambers will go to victim rights organizations. In a note Chambers wrote to the court, he said, "I elect not to contest the action for damages brought against me by the Levins. My only wish is for this nightmare to end, for both families and friends. I do not wish the Levins to endure any more pain." Chambers' first request for parole was denied, in part because Levin's mother told the board, "In my eyes, anything less than the maximum would devalue my daughter's life." The members of the parole board denied his release in 1992 because they believed Chambers would most likely break the law if he was paroled. While Chambers seemed to be somewhat contrite in the note he wrote to the court in 1988 about the wrongful death suit filed against him by the Levins, he didn't express any remorse at his 1994 parole hearing. According to the transcript of the hearing, Chambers told the board, "I guess I could give you the party line and say I've learned my lesson. I will never do this again. But that's not how I feel at this moment, because I have a lot of conflicting emotions." Chambers spent a total of 15 years in prison, 1,592 days of which were in solitary confinement for committing nearly 30 serious offenses while behind bars. Chambers tested positive for drugs multiple times, and prison officials found heroin and marijuana on his person and in his cell. He had problems completing college courses and drug rehab treatments, and he regularly fought with prison guards and other inmates. In 1988, just months after Chambers was sent to prison for killing Levin, he was given 90 days in solitary confinement when a corrections officer discovered a modified straight razor in his locker. Shortly after Chambers was charged with killing Levin, he began dating Shawn Koval, a young woman who lived in Manhattan and even appeared in the video in which Chambers strangled a doll. After Chambers pleaded guilty to killing Levin, Koval remained loyal to him, paying weekly visits to her inmate boyfriend until he was released in 2003 after serving 15 years in prison. Following Chambers' release, he and Koval lived in Georgia for several months before they moved into a Manhattan apartment. Chambers was released from Auburn Prison on February 14, 2003, after having served the entirety of his prison term due to his numerous infractions. His release was a media circus, with reporters staking out prime sections of the sidewalk opposite the prison as early as 13 hours before his 7:30 a.m. release time. The same day, the NBC news program, Dateline NBC, interviewed Chambers, who continued to claim that he had strangled Levin accidentally in an attempt to stop her from hurting him during rough sex. He also falsely denied that he had been disciplined in prison.
I never intended for anything to happen. I never even intended to go out that night, let alone hurt somebody.
The owner of Dorian's Red Hand settled with Levin's parents on their claim that the bar where Levin and Chambers had been before they went to Central Park on the night of her death had served too much alcohol to Chambers. In 2004, Chambers was arrested for possession of heroin and driving on a suspended license. He pled guilty in July of 2005, and on August 29th, he was sentenced to a reduced sentence of 90 days in jail and fined $200 for the license violation. The judge added 10 days to the time prosecutors and Chambers' lawyer had agreed on because Chambers was an hour late for the hearing. He would have faced up to a year in jail if he had been convicted after trial. On October 22, 2007, Chambers was arrested again, this time in his own apartment, and charged with 3 counts of selling a controlled substance in the first degree, 3 counts of selling a controlled substance in the second degree, and 1 count of resisting arrest. Koval was also arrested on 1 count of selling a controlled substance in the second degree. Police said Chambers, now 41, struggled with officers who tried to handcuff him on the felony charges. One detective suffered a broken thumb. Commenting on his new arrest, former Assistant District Attorney Linda Fairstein, who had prosecuted Chambers for Levin's death, said, "It doesn't surprise me. I always believed his problem with drugs and alcohol would get him into trouble again. He's had the opportunity in prison to detox and take college courses to straighten out his life, but that clearly is of no interest to him. He's learned nothing in the past 20 years. Chambers and Koval were charged with running a cocaine operation out of their apartment. The two had previously been given notices for not paying rent, and the phone had been disconnected. Chambers appeared in court on December 18th. According to the New York Post, his lawyer filed new papers elaborating on his psychiatric defense. The filing claimed that Chambers had become an addict at the age of 14 and was, by 2007, using 10 to 12 bags of heroin per day. It was also reported that he used cocaine, was smoking marijuana, and taking prescription drugs. Chambers planned to plead insanity. Prosecutors countered that Chambers was a drug dealer and had sold as much as $2,800 in heroin at a time to undercover police. Chambers faced life in prison on drug charges. On August 11, 2008, Manhattan DA's office announced that Chambers had pled guilty to selling drugs. On September 2, 2008, he was sentenced to 19 years on the drug charges. As of March 2021, he is at Shangung Correctional Facility, New York State Department of Corrections. His earliest release date from prison is January 25, 2024. So what secrets do you think this case holds? Do you believe Robert's claims that he was the victim and simply protecting himself? Or do you believe he is just a cold-blooded killer? Continue to send us your case suggestions to TheSecretSitsPodcast at gmail.com, and maybe our next listener-requested case may be your suggestion. I'm John Dodson, and this has been The Secret Sits. Audio engineering by Gabriel Dodson. Original artwork provided by Tony Lay.